welcome you all here to Top of the Hall. Not all of you are USC Marshall students. We have some graduate students from other schools as well. And this meeting is one of our Marshall Business School social impact meetings, and it's doubling as a gaming, social impact, entertainment event. And we are pairing up with the Society and Business Lab, as well as the USC Serious Games Network to put this on. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Abby Pfeiffer-Mandel to talk a little bit about SBL, and then we're going to turn it over to our awesome panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicole. I don't want to have my back to you guys, so I'm going to stay up here and have my back to these chairs. My name is Abby Pfeiffer-Mandel. I'm the Associate Director of the Society and Business Lab. We are a center of excellence within the business school. Show of hands, who is here from the business school community? Nice. Who is not from the business school community but is a USC student? Very nice. And who is none of the above? Great, welcome. Welcome to everyone. So the Society of Business Lab, SBL, we are a resource and a center for the USC community at large and the local community for individuals to use business skills in poverty alleviation. So we do a lot with education, healthcare, environment, homelessness, and other topics in which primarily business students, but students across the university have lots of programs, resources, courses, social entrepreneurship minor, lots of different ways to use business skills to change the world. We have been very, very fortunate and really, really lucky to meet up over the last few years with a team of wonderful people across USC who are all interested in different ways in the space of impact games, or serious games as they're called, although at least one person on our panel will forbid us from ever using the phrase serious games in the future, so that's the last time we're going to hear it tonight. But we have for a long time been talking about ways to get together and have an event that would speak to some different members of our community, such as all of you guys and your backgrounds, and we're really excited to do that tonight. We hope this is the first of many conversations that we'll have on this topic. I am really grateful to members of my staff, and most particularly Janet Kramer, for doing a wonderful job in getting this event together today. And I am really thrilled to introduce Laurel, a USC doctoral student at the Annenberg School, who's going to be moderating our panel today. So thank you in advance to you and to George and Laird for being here tonight. And thank you guys for coming.
Thank you all so much for sharing your time with us tonight. It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to having this engaging conversation and hearing from all of you at the end so we can share our passion and expertise, ask some questions, get some debate going. Over the course of the night, we're going to hear more about our fascinating panelists' careers. We're going to talk a little bit about definitions. What do we mean when we say serious or impact games, and what is a game anyway? We'll hear a little bit about why these individuals care about this topic and why we should too. We'll talk about the business side of it, especially since there were so many hands here from business and the rest of us who aren't in business. Wish we understood it better. And then finally, we're going to do a little prognostication and be future-minded. Think about what's coming down the pike. What are some lessons learned? What are some things to avoid? So that we can leave this place incredibly smarter than we came in. Also, with some good dinner memos. So without further ado, George and Laird, I was hoping that you could share with us a little bit about your experience so that we all understand why a privilege it is to be sitting here in the room with you and why what you have to say is worth listening to. So if you can tell us just a little bit about your professional background, some of the places that you've worked, things that you've done. Laird, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Really glad to see interest in this area because it's one that's important to me, and obviously we're here beyond the food. It's important to all of you. My background, the headline background is, and you'll hear that both of us worked at Activision for a great number of years, in commercial games, in games that you go to the store and buy, and we launched Skylanders, which is a kids game that we put out with toys and that show up in game. It's a collectible toy model applied to a video game, so sort of a new business model. There was billboards that I swear that the marketing team put over on Jefferson just for me to see, because they know that I teach here as well, and I was really appreciative of that. But so that kind of thing was sort of in the background of my career. Prior to that, I was actually a sound editor in the motion picture and television, primarily television area. I went here for graduate school in the cinema school before it was called Cinematic Arts. It's actually called the School of Cinema and Television. And prior to that, I got my engineering and media degree. And that's really where my interest in this area started, is it actually started in the media lab at MIT. Not that I got to do anything other than make some documentary films, but I saw other people doing really neat things with media. I saw a friend of mine who was running 3 Laserdisc players. I didn't know you could put 3 Laserdisc players in the same room and not have it overheat at the time. This is in the 80s.
You guys know what Laserdiscs are?
Yeah, Laserdisc, you probably know what it is. Let's just assume it was an ancient video delivery device, the size of a record. Anyway, but she had 3 screens up, and you could actually drive through this impoverished town in Michigan, where they'd gone and shot a lot of footage, to look at the impacts on the closure of an automotive plant. So this was less of a game and more of an exploration to see what was they had before and after footage. So what was the city like before, and what was it like after? And as you can all imagine from things we've read about the crises around Detroit, it was desolate and sad and impactful. So that in the back of my head, flash forward a few years, and I guess I've communicated to people over time that I really want to get involved in games around education, games around learning. And I had an opportunity, we came together because the Corporation of Public Broadcasting had put out a call for universities, commercial entities, and public television stations to come together and make a game and a show and a graphic novel and a website around civics. And basically, how do you teach the First through 13th Amendments, or the Bill of Rights, basically. And so I got asked to go on that sort of as the Activision representative and sort of executive produce that project. We went through a couple rounds, we got some prototype funding. It was really cool, and I was hooked. And I've said, when I'm done sort of making Call of Duties and things like Skylanders, I want to go do that full time. And so that is actually why I'm here, because it's something I have actually gone and done. So I actually left Activision in December to pursue this, because I think it's really a key part of taking what we've learned about making really engaging activities and bringing those with subjects that are meaty and weighty and that we want people to know about, but yet not experience in a dry or in a sort of pedantic manner, but rather let them explore and a little bit how I sort of over the shoulder of my friend Kareem sort of learned a little bit about what was going on in Michigan that was just not on my radar. That was a state I flew over on the way back east, on the way back. So that's sort of my background and sort of my interest.
Thank you for that origin story. There's a lot going on in there.
And I love origin stories. I did superhero games, so origin stories.
Exactly. He also did Walker, Texas Ranger.
Just the sound.
Just the sound. So you've worn so many hats in your career, coming from studying aeronautics and engineering at MIT all the way to today with some documentary film in there, some transmedia, creating toys that were the hit at Toy Fair. So it sounds like being in lots of different spaces has informed what you bring to the table and is dictating what's coming next. And how about you, George? I feel like your trajectory has been a bit more linear, but you talked about knowing a lot about, or a little about a lot of things. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about your...
You tell us a lot about a little.
Tell us a lot about a little. And do it quick.
No, I'll do it quick. Actually, my trajectory intersected in different ways with Laird for a long time. I'm not in any way an engineer. I don't know much about technology. I do know how to play games, and that was my direct exposure to it. My exposure to games way precedes actually working with games.
Everyone can say that. We all started out.
We all started there, and I started there, and I started putting quarters into arcade machines a long time before I developed any interest in studying anything, and a long time after. So I went to University of Michigan, actually had exposure to Michigan directly, and then fly over, and actually was in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I went across the river from, or across somewhere from Laird, actually, went to Harvard Law School and became a lawyer. Still playing video games along the way instead of studying, and that's sort of dealing with video games and dealing with different platforms and became an entertainment lawyer, and I practiced here in Los Angeles for some time until I kind of got tired of being, financing another movie, and took what at the time was a 3/4 pay cut, and joined a company that was, halfway out of bankruptcy and halfway still in it, and became an employee. I don't even remember what it was. I think like 80-something, and took a flyer on it and stayed there for 17 years. I think Laird preceded me by a couple of months, and has been their general counsel for a long time. Somewhere along the way, the company has grown somehow from having about being business students here. You'd appreciate that. From $40 million in revenue to $5 billion in revenue. So it's been a long ride. But my sort of moment of truth, or sort of aha moment, came somewhere around a few years back when I got involved in working with what was then a case you may be familiar with, protecting video games from attacks in California and First Amendment cases, and I passionately believe in First Amendment for any form of expression. So I was one of the people who kind of led the defense of video games over many years, from the time when video games weren't protected by anything to today, when it became video game as a form of expression had become protected by the Supreme Court, and I spent a lot of time at that time just sort of researching what video game really is. And I met a lot of very interesting people. I found out that there is a lot of things outside of just commercial expression of video games. I've met medical professors using video games in medical studies. I met teachers using video games in education. I met politicians using video games in campaign financing. I met people just using video games for social research and social impact. So I learned that game is far more than just, as Laird said, making a total. And
excuse me for interrupting. This sounds like the perfect segue into unpacking what is a game. So you're saying that it's far more than just Call of Duty, or that Call of Duty falls under that umbrella, but it isn't limited to that.
Well,
how do we define a game?
Well, it became clear to me that the game is just another way of describing something, that really what it was is an interactive experience, that what was embedded within the game, as opposed to a linear expression that you would find, reading a book, or watching a movie, or having a TV show, is the fact that you were, for the first time, whether you were a kid or an adult or anybody else, you were in control of what you were doing. You actually had the ability to interact with whatever medium you were interacting.
So let me see if I can summarize what I've heard so far. The characteristics of a game are nonlinearity, interactivity, and control or agency. Laird, how would you respond to that list?
Well, I would agree. I would add to that list. Generally, for a game, there generally is a rule set that is, if not given to the player, is something the player can identify through interaction with the experience. And there is almost always a win-lose condition for a game, as compared to a toy or a simulation. So I look at a game like The Sims. There are certainly lose conditions in The Sims. You can kill your Sims by not giving them doors or bathrooms and lighting fires and fireplaces and smoking them out.
We're advocating that.
And that's a serious offense. But there's no real win condition other than what you impose on it. You can say, well, I want to have a house that has 2 washing machines, 3 stereos, a pool, and and 3 pets or something like that.
Got it.
But it's not really given to you by, but the creators of the game didn't say that's the winning condition. As compared to a game like Civilization, which certainly has a lot of things that you can do. You can make different types of civilization, but in Civilization 1, you have to get to Alpha Centauri. That is a condition of winning the game. So, but agency is a really important word. I'm glad you used that one because I think that in this space, and I think this is what is why, like how we can even get into a lawsuit about video games a little bit is because players have actions they can take. They are then put in situations to take actions that we may consider inappropriate from a society point of view, but that doesn't make it inappropriate when it's in a fictional or even non-fictional virtual state.
Right, so then it calls into question the transfer of what happens between the game world and the real world. To what extent does this provide a space for modeling, for scaffolding, and for changing the world outside of the game? Which perhaps might be a way that we understand the objectives of serious or impact games. For the benefit of our audience who might not know about what serious or impact games are, can you describe it a little bit? Did I already get it? Is there anything that you can add on in order for us to know what we're talking about when we bandy about the term serious games or impact games?
You hate the term serious, so you might as well use this opportunity to kill it. And then I'm going to propose an alternative.
It's always more interesting when someone
Well, I
has an
mean,
extra.
there's really no particular like or dislike for the word serious. The word serious was born out of some years of, actually there's an American term, but now it's been adopted more in Europe than it is here. I think people here are kind of moving away from it. But the only reason why I'm sort of skeptical about the word is that it, as a marketing tool, again, being business people, you'd appreciate that, it is a turnoff. If you ask, in educational environment, okay, kids, now we're going to play serious games. If you're a 10-year-old, you'd immediately go, no, not that. It's not something that you necessarily want to do. If you want to describe it as something to people who are in the world of making it, again, it sort of implies that what other people are making is somewhat frivolous and unnecessary, non-serious, kind of trashy, almost in a way. There's no counterpart to it, whereas, what Laird's doing, for example, what he just finished with Skylanders is as serious as it gets. I mean, it's really is innovative and cutting edge. So it's just a bad word, it's just not so, it's unnecessary. There are many different other words that you can use for it. If it's even necessary to use those words, because there's so many different ways in which you can cross-pollinate between different types of sayings.
So it sounds like the word serious, or the term serious games has a few flaws. One, that serious doesn't sound like a lot of fun, so it's a tough sell to the kids. Two, that it sets up this binary, that if a game isn't distinguished as a serious game, then it must be a non-serious or unvaluable game. And so that's an unproductive kind of frame to even conjure.
Yeah, I think that one aspect of impact games, we'll use that for the moment, I'll propose something else in a second, is that there is, if an idea of a game designer or a game creator or a team to create a game, and this could be a board game, this could be something you make up with a deck of cards that you come up with a new rule set and you play. There's an entertainment element to it. There is a challenge. Often people get excited about trying to, sort of beat the game. That's an idea to show mastery. How often do people go back and replay the same game? If it's especially a video game, yet they'll go back and play Monopoly multiple times or Scrabble, right? Because there's different elements of mastery to get, or each rule, each playthrough is different. But here you also have maybe a social message, maybe it's an education message, an education goal. You want to teach fourth grade math. in a game setting? Well, you have some level of target that is beyond just entertaining, but it's still entertaining. A term that I've been playing with in my head today as I thought about this is nonfiction games. It's a little weird because nonfiction and games seem to be like they're in opposition to each other, but we don't feel discomfort between the fiction and nonfiction sections of a bookstore or library. Documentary game, right? That would be the film term. And probably 10 years ago, I think I wouldn't have even bothered to propose that for the marketing reason. But documentaries have had an amazing renaissance, frankly, in the past decade. Become very acceptable and they have theatrical distribution, and I think really helped by cable television and satellite television. So those are possible other ways that sort of they come with words that aren't judgmental. Nonfiction is just a description. Now, what happens if you have fictional elements in your nonfiction game? I mean, I would say Michael Moore has fictional elements in his documentaries. Does that make him not a documentarian, or does it make him a storyteller? Or if we don't take someone controversial like Michael Moore, but you take March of the Penguins, no one goes around saying, well, March of the Penguins is really trying to beat me up about how penguins breed in Antarctica. But at the end of the day, people made decisions about what they showed you. So I think maybe those are words we can play with, or terms we can play with that describe less what is a judgment of the game and more of what is the intent of the creators of the game, and therefore as an audience, what should be our intent as receivers.
Let's unpack that idea and talk a little bit about the potential of these games. How can they change the world? How can they change individuals?
Well, the most important, regardless of what game it is, whether it's a game with, fictional game with commercial possibilities, it's a documentary game, it's any kind of game, the most important thing about the game is the game. It's the gameplay of the game. And Laird mentioned the word entertaining. I would take it a little bit further and maybe take it away from entertaining. It's not something that necessarily needs to be fun. Some of these games don't necessarily need to be fun. They need to be engaging. They need to be something that you would want to come back to and play. Like I said, take Michael Moore's documentary. It's engaging. You watch it and it provokes thought. It's something that you may even want to watch again. Maybe you want to watch 3 times. You may want to find something interesting. And so on and so on. But there's an engaging element to it.
In our comm school, we talk about transportation. That's the phenomenon of feeling lost in a narrative. And even though the story might be sad, we still feel pleasure from losing touch of our own reality and going into a story and feeling like we've gone on a journey.
Yeah. And it needs to be, something that has, by virtue of interactivity of it, it can't be a linear story. It can't just be something that you play through once and you're done with it. It needs to have multiple conclusions, multiple endings, things that will allow you to deal with it, more than one time. Then it becomes a game.
So let's get concrete, because I have a suspicion that some of you have never played a serious game. So Laird, maybe you can give us an example of a serious game, its context, its objectives, some of the rules, and what are some of the outcomes?
Sure. So I'm actually going to give you an example from one that's about to launch, and the reason I'm going to give it is because it's something you'll all be able to play very shortly, and it's literally waiting for paperwork from the university. So there is a team at the Rosier School working with the team from Cinematic Arts and ID department about college knowledge. So here's the problem going into it, which is kids, particularly in low-income areas, who should be able to be college ready. They have the intelligence. They're in a school that actually has the programs. Will probably not get enough guidance counseling to know when the free federal financial aid form is due, and then they will miss that, and they will not be able to go to college, or they won't know all these things. How do you use a game to do this? So the team came up with first a paper-based game. It's a good prototyping with cards. You can actually order this card game called Application Crunch. Collegeology is the overall overall brand. So if you search for Collegeology USC or Collegeology Games, you can learn more about it. But the Facebook game, you play, so here's some decisions that had to be made. So how do you take the subject of college knowledge and abstract it so everyone will feel like it's not themselves going through it, but at the same time go through the different steps. So in this game, you are mentoring an avatar who is not you, but may represent you, and you get 3 to choose at a time, and then every week there's a different set of 3. So the idea is you hopefully will play this multiple times. There's an overarching metagame about building up your school's facilities, because they're persistent between round. But you're basically trying to get this kid into college. And you have a calendar, you have moves, only so many moves you can do a day, and you can study, you could work, you could write letters, you could write essays, you could request your application to be submitted. All of these things take points. And so in this is a serious game or an impactful game, because you know something? If you forget that the deadline was 4 a.m. to turn in your application to the liberal arts school that your kid wanted to go to, you missed the deadline. That happened to me last week. That I thought it was 4 p.m. that the deadline was due, and instead of submitting it before I went to bed, I was going to do it the next day when I could have my academics a little bit more. It's based on a point system. So go ahead and look this up, and hopefully, we're hopefully going to launch it in the next couple days, and then you'll all be able to play it. It's going to be on Facebook, so it'll be a Facebook-based game. But it's fun in the sense that you're trying to figure out how to get into college, but it's serious in the sense that if you take away from it, there are deadlines. You have to ask for a letter of recommendation more than the day the application is due. Basic skills that all of you have mastered because you're all here or have gone to universities. That there are kids out there, and not very far from where we're sitting today, who don't know this. And so that's the goal of the game.
So it kind of raises their consciousness to some of the steps in the process, some of the language that's used, so that when they're going through their real lives, they know, maybe I should go talk to that guidance counselor person and ask about FAFSA.
Yeah. And in fact, actually going to the guidance counselor in the game is free, and you get a pride point for it. So,
that's incentivizing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Abby.
Will that game make money?
So that's an excellent question. Do you want to put that here, or do you want to talk about it in the business section? Because I can talk very much about that as well.
I say we go with the flow. Let's talk about money.
So this is a perfect example, actually, because frankly, my thinking is by itself, no. And here's why. And I'm very involved in this because actually one of the things that I've been doing besides teaching here is I consult for the Gates Foundation, and the Gates Foundation is funding this game. And foundations, as anyone who's gotten grants knows, love to fund projects, right? Oh, that's a great idea. You're going to go from March 1st to, April 30th, 3 years later, and you will do this. Games, particularly online games, are something like that, except then there's that whole keep it online and maintain it while Adobe changes Flash and Facebook changes privacy policies. And so where's the sustainability level? And no one wants to fund sustainability. That's boring. So one of the tasks one of the things I'm assigned to on this game is figuring out how to keep this thing online. So the reasons why it won't make money are, one, universal access is a big key piece of this, right? So a Facebook game, a Zynga-based game, if you've read anything about it, it's a funnel model. Everybody's a player. 80% of the players are playing for free. They're trying to pull you down into the monetary systems where, well, yes, I only get 5 moves today. I could wait till tomorrow, or I could buy 10 more moves right now and keep playing. And if you don't care about money, you could spend thousands of dollars a month playing these ridiculous games.
Or if you don't know that you are inadvertently using your mother's credit card.
Or, yes, exactly. That's right. That's absolutely true. So can't do that in this game, because what are you going to gate? You're not going to give them the information about the free federal financial aid form. You have to pay to get that information. Totally unfair. And then also the target audience really can't afford it. So there's a situation where, well, you probably could create a version of the game for alpha parents who have kids that are already getting the training they need because they've been actually, since they've had their little app in their crib about how to get into college, and it's just been sort of reiterating some of these deadlines, and they're skipping the financial aid form anyway. So the business model I propose for this is actually one of sponsorship, which is, here's something that's very valuable. You have students playing this game that are college interested, so that's useful to lots of people who rent textbooks or sell textbooks, people who are trying, smaller schools that don't get to play, but yet are actually in need of student diversity or in need just in students, period. College testing services, right? Like people, there are free ones and then there are paid ones, but all of them are looking for people to go through the testing processes. So I could see a model, and we'll see if this works, check back with me in a year, where you basically this game would be hosted by a company. So at our website, come play Application Crunch, which is what it's called. No, this one's called Mission Admission, I'm sorry, Mission Admission. And it's only available at so-and-so company's website or on so-and-so company's Facebook page. Where I think it's, where I want to be cautious is for-fee universities, like tech universities, I think should not be appropriate to host this game because they're actually going to try to pull the students to that. So that'd be my answer to that. I think you could make money with it because it's really good, but I think it would be outside the spirit of why it was made.
So it sounds like,
With Application Crunch, I know that on the website there's like a donate one and get one model.
Yeah.
How do you decide who gets the donation? I'm just curious about that.
So there's a separate page in there where you can ask for a free copy. Mm-hmm. So effectively, people can sign up if you run a school or if you have an 8th grade class and you want to run this or whatever, you do an after-school program. You put your name in there, and basically how that list gets fulfilled is that there's actually a person on the other side of that list who's saying, is this person qualified? Like there was a request that came in from a university professor who makes games like this, asking for a free copy, and the answer was like, come on, can you not flop down $29.95 or whatever it is? But then there's someone from West Adams, school that wants a copy, and they would be at the top of that list. Yeah. So very manual. It's not scalable, actually. And interesting, the game is available on Amazon, and it's not sold because there's no marketing behind it. So that's one of the sustainability pieces we have to figure out, which is how do you actually market the game when there's no revenue stream.
I'm sensing that putting together a diverse coalition of people to work on this project is important because you're bringing in that expertise thinking about sustainability. That's rare. Somebody from marketing would have been awesome, maybe helped you to move that product on Amazon. Present. George, you come from a background where you worked at Activision and overseen it from nearly collapsing to making billions of dollars. So I would assume that you have some experience about putting together, making money, and putting together teams.
Right.
What can you tell us about that?
Well, look, I mean, you have to, well, first of all, I'm much more, well, I can't say I'm much more optimistic than Laird because we're both pretty optimistic, but
Because of both rays of sunshine.
There is definitely areas of, in fact, serious games that are going to make money. In some areas, are going to make a lot of money.
Let's hear about those.
So, and you really have to you're in a catch-the-wave kind of environment right now, where this stuff is kind of crusting, and you have to look for the right place to invest. So you have to kind of divide this serious gaming into different areas. Medical applications. There is a whole lot of money to be made in that. In medical applications,
Can you give me an example?
there's been all sorts of games that have been tried, for example, in cognitive learning. Games that are being used for example, for stroke victims. Games that are being used for PTSD. Games that could be used for autism. Things like that. Games that are, for example, being used in connection with exercise. Exercise games are huge. And if properly managed, could be used could be considered serious games. So all of that area is pretty wide open. There's a fair amount of money coming from different sources, including hospitals, including the government, including insurance companies. It's just a matter of being able to pull together, and I'm not trying to make it sound simple, it's very complicated, but pull together hospitals, pull together doctors, pull together people who actually know how to make games, and make something out of it. Another area, and this is is very interesting because there is a big differentiation in this between the United States and Europe. There's a fair number of companies in Europe that made very good showing of themselves by making corporate applications in games that would never fly here simply because in Europe, sustainability and social responsibility and all of those things that don't seem to find a lot of traction in America are not only considered to be necessary, but in some places considered to be legally necessary. So you find companies, and it's interesting, I pulled together just yesterday, I was showing this to Laird, there's at least like a dozen projects being run by different companies in France, in Netherlands, in Germany that create these applications for huge companies. I mean, we're not talking about little companies, huge companies. Big ones that provide games because they consider games to be the best way to provide their version of sustainability for the public.
So games for what purpose?
That show how they address the environment, to show how they address the economies of resources.
So, for example, a European company like Alcatel has. Is that impressive that I came up with one?
In fact, it's one of the companies that has it.
I knew that. So they've come up with a game that they want to teach the public about how they use resources.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And they commission a group of people. I can tell you the company that's pretty big there. Say Design, DAESIGN, that does nothing but these corporate applications.
So it's a way of communicating
commission.
with the public.
Exactly.
Building that relationship.
Exactly. And they do them for a huge company after huge company after huge company.
Interesting.
There's an interesting parallel to document. So how many people here have had to go through California harassment training through a job? If you're an employee here at USC, you have to do it if you work for a company, right? So when I came here, so one of the downsides of working for two companies at the same time is you have to do the training twice. It's like paying your state disability. You don't get a refund. Maybe you do get a refund on that. It doesn't matter. So I couldn't imagine that anyone would have worse videos than Activision about this. But I'm wrong, because USC has worse videos about this. They're absolutely horrendously acted. The storylines were ridiculous. In the 1970s, and this company still exists, and some of you on laptops will find it because I don't remember the name. John Cleese of Monty Python fame, he founded a company around humorous corporate training, and just took his gift for humor and made it that you'd want to keep watching these videos about anything, and because they were funny.
Were they parodies or were they?
They were parodies, but the actual facts were valid. Okay. And I think that now those weren't interactive. I mean, I think if you did it today, they'd be interactive. But they showed that you could take something serious like harassment, and let's be honest, it's. I actually look at doing it, and it's maybe idealistic. It's my privilege to do this training, right? Because I am in a university of diverse people, of diverse cultures and backgrounds, and I want to be sensitive, and I don't want to stupidly do things that would offend somebody else. So, I'm not. It doesn't bother me. I do figure out how to get 2 hours of work done while I watch the videos for 2 hours, and you have to be really fast with how much you're on the page, but how much you're not on the page. So I've just turned it into a game, of course. But I think that those are that shows that's, and that company made a lot of money, if I recall. It was very, very successful.
And there are companies that are doing that as a game.
Mm-hmm.
Another game that I've seen just recently again in Europe, I don't know why they're not using it here, actually being used as a, again, business school guys will appreciate it, as a training tool for employees. Very simple. I mean, it combines gameplay with actual footage. And one of them, I start playing, and then start playing it. But it was very simple. You're an executive. You're drop shipped to a company that is not doing so well in China, and this is what you're doing. This is the circumstances
Interesting. So
that
it's
you
sort
are
of like
being put
scenario
in.
planning.
Yeah, it's a scenario planning, and it's being used as a corporate training tool. You can imagine infinite number of scenarios that you can create similar to that. So, is that a serious game? Yeah, sure, why not?
It's a learning game anyway.
It's a learning game. It's a teaching tool.
So what I'm hearing is that lucrative venues for serious games lie in the medical sector, where interested parties who have financial means might include hospitals, insurance agencies.
And parents too. If you think of it, there's games that will help. But the issue is like lazy eye. You're familiar with that, or what, right? So if you're a parent of a child who's say 5 years old and has developed this problem or had this problem from birth, and you were told by a doctor that if you get the child to do this thing for the next 2 years, the muscles will get strengthened and it will solve this problem, so it's not a long-term issue, right? Like if you, are you gonna forgo things to pay for that application? Yeah, you betcha. That's your kid. If you can, and it's not like I haven't found that loving one's child, it varies by income level. Manifestation of it may be different based on the resources available, but they still want the kids to do well. So that's
True.
but the problem is you can't do it once. You have to do it over and over again. So then the game helps for the compliance of the child to continue doing
It
it.
sounds like delivery might also be superior in this context because people can log on, potentially if this is a digital game, and not all serious games need to be digital. They could be a card game, it could be some kind of tangible object that you interact with, but it might be easier to get things to people in remote areas if it's using that mode of delivery. Other lucrative venues for serious games also include corporate sites where they can be used for training purposes and for communicating with the public. And maybe from making money in these areas, you can slide some money over and help your PR, your corporate social responsibility, your pharma, and make something like application crunch so that poor kids can go to college, or something like a game called Dojo that I'm working on with Game Desk, which is about emotional regulation for urban youths. So maybe that can be a model where a group of people have multiple projects, and there are a few that pay the bills, and there are a few that sort of, pay another kind of due, your spiritual allowance.
Yeah, no, there are games that are, very much impactful, very interesting. There was a game called Bulletproof, I think, that was released on iPad for Amnesty International anniversary that basically told you to stop the bullets as you're standing in front of a firing squad. There was a game where you had to manage a train, and you didn't know exactly what you're doing, but you were managing trains and how many passengers you would get on each train, and at the end of the game you figured out that you were really managing a train that was going to Auschwitz.
Whoa.
I mean, that was,
It's a big reveal.
Not a particularly fun game at the end. But, you can find there are some very, very hardcore, impactful games. How do they make money would probably be difficult to establish. It's really a foundational grant kind of thing, work of, very interesting thing that you would do because that's what you want to do.
So it sounds like groups have to have that sort of mixed model where they do well by doing good, and then they just do very poorly in a financial sense and do a lot of good. So it's sort of that mix of doing multiple things. So let's come back to the kind of brass tacks of who needs to be on your team, how do you function productively? Because we're talking about people who come from different cultures. We have engineers, we have artists, we have business folks, we have communication-oriented folks, and we all sort of have different orientations. We grew up going to school in different places, hanging out with different people, speaking different languages, sometimes using different terms for the same phenomenon, sometimes not even knowing what phenomenon people are referring to, but think is very important. So what do we do about that?
Well, these are still games and they're still projects, so that's not specific to this area, I don't think. I think this is an issue of project management. This is an issue of communication. One of the things I've seen in my sort of few months now of consulting is that at the university level, particularly on things like the schools of education and interactive, you don't find a lot of marketing expertise. And not only that, you don't actually even find a big desire by the people making the game to have that expertise. Like there's a realization it's important to have a business element, but the team over at Rosier, even if application crunch and mission admission and the games are going to follow could make a lot of money, like none of them want to give up their educational jobs and go start a company. And starting a company is really hard. So it's sort of hard to I'm just going to be a professor 100% of the time, and then at night I'm going to go and start my company and hope it runs, right? Anyone who believes that has either hit the lottery and is wasting their money, or is not going to actually get much out of their company. You have to put everything you have into it. One of the reasons why I think Activision's been successful and didn't fall off into bankruptcy again, and was living actually, it was I could tell you, MechWarrior paid the bills in 1995. And then that was followed by the MechWarrior sequel that paid the bills in 1996, and then sort of nothing really paid the bills in 97. And then 98, Tony Hawk, or maybe it was 99, Tony Hawk came and paid the bills for a while, and then Call of Duty started paying the bills, and now Call of Duty and World of Warcraft, and this guy never paid the bill. But, and lots of other things. But more to the point, though, is that Activision developed a philosophy, really actually brought in the Jim Collins books. Anyone know those? Good to Great, Built to Last, and some other ones like that actually became our company mantra of get everybody on the bus, focus on one thing. And so, not surprisingly, then when I go to talk to university professors about we have to really focus on this, they're but I have this class to teach, and I'm working on this paper, and I've got this grant application due, and I've got this little bit of time that's into this project. And so that's where I think then either if I were grant funding, I'd be well, who's your business person? Where's the opportunity for a business person to come in? And you'd be well, I don't want to have this one game have one business person. So, some of the things I'm grappling with in my recommendations here is there, at a university level, is there a team that's formed that can help all these projects and is sort of a resource at the university level funded from a bunch of grants? Or is it that the granting agency says, and as part of your grant, you get 5% of this person's time who's works for the foundation or whatever it is, because I think that is a key element to having these things be successful and build them as real projects. That's on the marketing side. Then on the production side, the same thing. It's a little easier to find production people though, or producers on these teams because they tend to be the people who sort of initiate everything. But again, the same problem is if they are doing 15 things at once, and yet there's some software development team that they've hired as well. I see this up at a professor I'm working with at the University of Washington. He's in everything. And so he's had to finally hire a project manager just to oversee his projects that he thought he was going to manage. He self-identifies, in my opinion, as an artist. He's a computer science guy, so it's great. He's a computer scientist artist. Something, he's a lot happier now that he has a project manager.
Interesting. So, George, in your opinion, do you feel like the business students, let's talk about you all first since you're most of the people in the room, but also students who are in game design need a different sort of educational training in order to be able to participate on these teams or to think about new potential possibilities that are coming down the pike?
No, they just need commitment to this particular opportunity, and they need to think about what and how it may apply to different applications. The road to games that are sold in stores or online, even that is very murky these days. There's a lot of shifts going on. Are we going to have games games that are sold on GameStop, or they're all going to go online. I mean, even that is very difficult to understand. This is even more difficult to understand. I mean, this is, it's very easy to think about a game you want to make. It's much more difficult to understand how you're going to distribute it and so on. And that's why you really need a business person. Everybody wants to have a game right now. People realize that, the younger, it's funny, I'm talking about the younger generation here, but there are people even younger than you are out there. The ones who babysitting, the 6-year-olds and the 7-year-olds, who really only want to do games at the moment. They don't want to read books. They don't even want to go to the internet that much. And their language that they're communicating with each other are game language. And that's the next wave that's coming in, and that's the wave you're sort of catering to down the road. That's what I'm saying, learning through games, and teaching through games, and discovering through games is going to become much more prevalent and important down the road, and that's why you're sort of riding the crest of this or thinking about it down the road. It's not going to be that much more different, in 10 years than the books and the movies and all of the things that are making, enormous amounts of money right now. And, being a business student, what you really need to do is understand how to put these teams together, because really what you have is you go to, you find out that there's this medical professor who's been experimenting with games and medical technology for the last 5 years, but if you find out how he made his games and what his game looks like, is she spent, 95% of the grant on research and 5% of the grant on making a game. And the game looks like something from 1982. And it's like, why did you do that? You're like, I didn't know how to make games. I'm not a game person. Why did you get somebody who's a game person? I didn't have money. No, you did, but I had to spend it on research. No, you didn't. Why are you researching if this game looks like crap? So you really, the business person is the person who will put together that, medical person and that, game person, and actually have them make something that makes commercial sense together.
So I think that what I'm hearing is networking across the university. I feel like business students are fantastic at having conversations amongst themselves and coming up with really dynamic synergies. But sometimes those connections with folks from other schools don't always occur. And that's how this business person who's going to save the professor, and the professor who's going to save whoever suffers from that malady, can really optimize their assets. And at the same time, it sounds like the professor needs to get a better understanding of real-world utility and not just have his or her head in the clouds solely focusing on researching and not looking at when the rubber hits the road. Ben?
I just had kind of a follow-up on that. I wonder what you think about taking teams apart instead of just putting them together, because I feel like a lot of times in commercial ventures, the business person is not just there so we can all get along and have fun together, but because that's how you get your next round of investing. And I feel like that's often in academia, it's not how it's set up. The grant is not dependent on having a business person at all involved.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's often easier to get a grant if you have good language and good words, and keep the business people from muddling things up. I feel like publishers often play that role in the commercial industry. They'll step in and say, sorry, if you actually want us to publish this, we're going to own a bunch of the IP, and we're going to do X and Y and Z, and this is what we're going to do. We make the call now. And I feel like in academia, professors would hate to be told, sorry, I know this is your great idea, but now we own the IP, and we're going to make X and Y and Z in order to ensure distribution. So I'm just curious about your thoughts about when there should be more tension, because I think universities often have been great at incubating a lot of serious game ideas, but so many of them have died in universities when they could have gotten greater distribution.
Well, absolutely, and there's two elements to that as well. Beyond that, which is tech transfer office, and how much of an advocate is a tech transfer office at the university for getting that out there. And the second is really you have to go in and identify if you're a business person saying, you go help this company, you go help this project survive beyond its grant phase, what would you do? Well, one of the first things you do is, business people in this role, I think, are also psychologists, or maybe primarily psychologists with a little bit of Excel knowledge thrown in. Because you first have to identify what are the motivations behind the leaders of it. And if the motivations behind the people are, just let me finish this and I'm happy for it to, not happy is the wrong word. If it dies, it's okay because I got 4 of the grants in the pipeline and I know I can pay for my grad students. And that actually is it's a perfectly valid motivation to worry about what's going to happen with your grad students in your lab because they're thinking on a trajectory that's different compared to that specific project. So if that's the case, then you look for the compromises or the wins, right? So this professor up at Washington, he cares about data. He is super data driven. He would like nothing more than to have his games go out there, even if someone else publishes and he makes just a little bit of money, if he gets the data stream. Because that's how he's going to refine his routines. And that's what drives him. Because he's trying to find the most perfect adaptive learning model. That's what he wants to discover. He's a computer scientist. He's a computer scientist who has a passion in this area. And you might find that someone else's motivation is different. And so I think it's the business person then goes in at that point and says, okay, I see a view for how this game can come out. How do I keep the participants happy? And then sometimes you need to pull it away, as George was sort of referring to. It's like, what are you researching? You don't have anything to research yet. And so you have to kind of go in and pry and cajole and take them out for a beer and find out what they want out of life.
Yeah, I think in the longer run, this environment, if you're really talking about making returns on the investment in this environment, it's not sustainable on grants. Grants is not, it may give you the ability to create maybe a prototype of something, but it's really, you cannot live on grant to grant because it's just not something that, will work out for you in terms of creating a commercial product. This is really, you're looking at something that will have to live on capital, venture capital money down the road. Not so long down the road. You'll have to do it the same way as all, high-tech environment works. You find a good research idea, you marry it with people who can create something out of it, and you go on the road and find money.
So just to play devil's advocate a little bit, is there any way to attain mass distribution without selling your soul and giving up all of your IP rights and surrendering the project to some commercial interests that might not jive with your philosophies? Is another funding source potentially one that we create, all of us here in this room? Is there another kind of funding agency that maybe we can think outside of the box to put together right now? What would it look like? Or is there anything else out there that actually exists that we don't have to get so creative? Think through.
Well, as I said earlier, I think there are companies that have value out of hosting these games. I think there can be because they're looking for audience members. This is a way to attract audience members. I stumbled across something. I assume it's a commercial venture, but basically, kids' financial literacy. This is something that's not really taught in schools, and yet easy to understand today why we would want our 6 and 7-year-olds to have an understanding of money and value and banks and interest and things like that, and what's the time to do it. So I'm working with somebody who's written about this for years, children's books, and she wants to go digital. So we're searching for competitors. Who else is out there? And it turns out there's a company doing a not very good sort of bank game, but it's like for small local bank branches that have 6 branches but have a website, because now online banking and all that sort of stuff, that's just a service you buy. If you're Wells Fargo, you build your own. But if you're a small mid-cap bank, you can just license all of bill pay and online banking and taking pictures of your checks and stuff like that. So you can license this game as an attractive thing, so companies are effectively paying for this kids learning stuff. The knowledge is good. It's about coin matching and other things like that. But it's really a way to get kids to go to the website so the parents see where the kids are, so they move their money to that branch.
I see.
So that's one. So one option is the sponsorship model, which is I want that to be around for people because people are coming through this portal that I want to see my services.
I I see. So you sort of retain control. Yeah,
Yeah,
Kristen.
Kristen.
Another example is Indie Fund. You know about Indie Fund?
Yeah.
So a bunch of successful or a small group of successful independent game developers started a fund to support smaller independent game developers. And they not only helped them through the process of selecting a couple of individuals to help support financially, but they also helped them through the difficult process of IP and just getting to the next step. Totally amazing and successful way of doing it internally that I suggest to all the MBA people here.
And then I guess a parallel to that would be in the sort of the gaming story the past 2 weeks is Kickstarter and Double Fine Productions. Everyone familiar with that? Yes. Hey, I threw in. I'm like, I played all the Ron and Tim's games when I was back at my Lucas days and whatever, and they were there too. And I'm like, I don't care that they didn't already need my money because they had already passed their thing. So Kickstarter is a very interesting, micro financing element as well.
Excellent.
I have a question regarding, I guess, a sponsorship model.
Yeah.
That's coming from a non-business, so please bear with me. One particular challenge that I would see is that these kinds of games don't necessarily follow very established models, necessarily so. There's a lot of experimentation, there's a lot of risk-taking that needs to happen on the creative side, and so how do you get buy-in? The model with collegeology, it seems like this, it's grant funded, therefore it already exists, therefore it can already be shown to prove something to the folks that will come in and be sponsors. But, if that's not, if you don't, how do you get buy-in or from the get-go and how,
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and absolutely, it's really tough if you're literally I have a great idea and it's exactly $0.
Yeah.
And I can't work for free on it myself. I need to actually have employment, but I can't also.
Can you answer that question?
So my answer is that I think you have to go in spurts. I think that is where Kickstarter would come in. I think there are small business grants. There are both for businesses, SBIRs are possible. There are small foundations. There are personal foundations that will give money to start projects. Look at your makeup of your team. Is your team made up of some group of people that that somebody else wants to support? If it were 100% easy, then I probably wouldn't have time to come here because I'd be doing a bunch of them. So, but I think that the answer is that you also want to think. One of the great things about having deadlines, and I'll just call a monetary crunch a deadline, is because effectively, if you run out of money, you run out of time, and you run out of your project, even if it's not done. Is it does force you to be super creative. And so, is there a technology you can use and you can reduce your programming need? Can you go to Creative Commons and pull all the art assets that you possibly need, at least to get it to a point to show what you want to do? Can you work with, are there, one of the ways in my advanced game class that I co-teach with the engineering school, there's not the fine arts department here at USC has shown a strong interest in providing artwork to the interactive projects. And it's not to blame them. It's very a portfolio-driven program, and a lot of the stuff that you do when you're making a game is not very portfolio-worthy. But then there are schools like Atlantic College in Puerto Rico and Noman in Hollywood, which is an animation school, that actually they're trying to train very technically proficient students. They love to have their students work on our games, and they get credit at their school. So if you just flip this, so it's not a student game and now it's something to be successful, are there students you can get to work on your projects that their compensation is experience and the ability to say they worked on a game. So it's really pulling up by the bootstraps, and then once you have something to show, then you go on the road and you try to get the rest of that sponsorship.
I was excited to see a couple of hands pop up on this side of the room, and I'd love to get as many questions out as possible. So let's start with you, Sarah.
Sure. So my question would be, because I'm hearing a lot about getting the grants, get things going, get it out there, have the professor work on this and that, hiring grad students, but I'm not hearing much about how an individual grad student who has a limited time at university actually gets the support from the university itself in terms of I run into this question a lot at work. I work at the Center for Scholarly Technology, and we have a small group of students who's developing application for USD students. And a lot of ideas get shut down because there is a security issue involved, university is not going to let us do it, or many, many issues. So in that regard, we are actually not being able to come up with something that will improve the condition because of systems. And I'm from interactive media, so we are the game designers, and we have a very limited time frame, which is 3 years. So by the time we go into thesis year, then most students cannot really commit. And the first year, we are trying to figure out what's happening. So how to solve that issue? Like, there are like people from other division. Even like 2 weeks ago, I had a student who was a PhD student from.
Excuse me for cutting you off. I feel like you have a really rich question, and we're getting a good sense of the constraints that you're operating under. Laird, maybe you can briefly respond to that.
I'll try to. You're trying a very specific case of actually getting support from the university. Now, the university has some funding mechanisms, like they get large NFS grants and SF grants, and then redistribute it out throughout the university. But I don't have a specific answer because what you're talking about, someone says to me, you can't do that because of security concerns. Some element is the conservative nature of a large university, and some of it is true because, the fact that, for example, USC emails to users like IMAP, which is really insecure, is not because they don't know it, it's because it's really hard to change. So I'm being a little defeatist, I think, in my answer, but I think the answer is that it'd be pushing more to have the idea be so amazing that the people who are saying no now are convinced. I really just turned that right back on you. I'm sorry for doing that.
It's tough. Sometimes there are these bureaucratic barriers.
Yeah.
I see that you had your hand up.
Hi, I'm actually a graduate student at the Annenberg School, and I'm doing my thesis on serious games, specifically games for health and how they can positively impact children. But so far, I've been doing research on how there are critics that say that serious games can potentially, specifically games for health, can't change lifestyle habits for children. And I argue that there is tremendous potential for serious games. So how would you respond to that?
George, you want to take this one?
You're reading the wrong critics. No, there is, happy to provide you with that, but there is massive amount of research that indicates that games of all sorts and kind, I don't know what specific traits or behaviors you're looking at, are capable of affecting those traits and behaviors over time, depending on what you're trying to show or accomplish. And are being used today for therapeutical purposes.
I think what the possibly part of the criticisms might be, so chocolate broccoli is a term often used in this space, or at least in learning space, which is like if you could just make the broccoli taste good, everyone would eat it. But the answer is if you gave someone chocolate broccoli, or let's just say broccoli with cheese sauce, which would be a little bit more appetizing, right? All you're training them to do is eat cheese sauce. That happens to be covering up something, and you're not going to get them to eat the broccoli without the cheese sauce. So I think if the game itself is actually giving the broccoli and is doing it in a fun manner, but not training you to, and 70% of people have a gene that makes broccoli bitter, so it's really not anybody's fault about broccoli. We're just not supposed to eat it. Is that it's actually that the game is fun, but the learning is true, and I think it'd be any game that is more just a game that's pretending to be fake would not have that benefit. But there's tons of research out there from lots and lots of reputable research scientists or tenured track who have millions of dollars of funding that the government really thinks that they're decent, are showing behavioral changes, and not just in small, like I did it with 5 people and they changed, right? Doing it with thousands of people trials.
They're actually, I completely agree, and that's what my whole argument is about. But actually recently in the LA Times there was an article there was a study done that was proven to show that active games, that there was a study that showed that children who played active games for versus non-active games, like there was no real change in that, and that was shocking to me because I've done so much research.
They were Wii games. They weren't very active. I mean, there's a whole. I mean, there was
Yeah.
a lot to see in how they constructed and what they were testing. I read the same thing, and it's,
Yeah.
I
think that game was
that
not
was a design
effective.
problem. That
Yeah.
wasn't a. I don't think it's something inherent to these.
Yes, I think that's the problem with that conclusion. The conclusion was they extended that out. I saw that as well. And the New York Times has been way down on technology and education in the past 6 months. They finally had one nice article about Mooresville, North Carolina, I think, in the past few weeks.
Right.
But I think there's a little bit of a backlash going on as well.
I mean, look, you have
That basis.
to understand that, and this is something that goes back to what I've been looking at for many years. Games are, in and of themselves, games are controversial for many reasons, not related to games. It is a favorite subject for many people to make easy political capital off. And depending on who looks at it and how it's being done, it's been twisted, it's been kicked around, it's been challenged in many